The copper pans hung from the ceiling rack like the dormant bells of a silent cathedral, gleaming under the harsh, humming fluorescence of the industrial kitchen. Everything was stainless steel and shadows. The air was thick, heavy with a humidity that felt less like steam and more like breath, wet, cloying, and trapped. Julian stood at the butcher block, his posture rigid, his chef's whites starched to a pristine, armor-like stiffness. In his hand, a Japanese gyuto knife, forged from folded Damascus steel, caught the light. The pattern on the blade looked like flowing water, or perhaps, if one looked long enough, like the intricate topography of muscle fibers. "Mise en place," Julian whispered, the words scratching his dry throat. "Everything in its place." He looked across the pass, past the heat lamps that were currently cold, to the chef's table. It was the best seat in the house, nestled right inside the kitchen, usually reserved for high-paying VIPs who wanted to watch the master at work. Tonight there was only one guest. Elena sat in the high-backed velvet chair. She was dressed in her favorite evening gown, the emerald silk draped loosely over her frame. She had been beautiful once, a week ago. Now, she was a masterpiece of a different medium. The discoloration had set in, a marbling of green and violent purple tracing the veins beneath her translucent skin, resembling a road map of a cursed country. Her head lolled slightly to the left, kept upright only by the stiff collar of the dress and a hidden brace Julian had fashioned from heavy-gauge plating wire. "I'm making the duck, my love," Julian announced, his voice trembling with a manic, cheerful affectation. "Confit, with the blood-orange reduction you adore. It takes time, but we have time. We have all night." Elena did not answer. A single, iridescent housefly landed on the cloudy film of her left eye, rubbing its forelegs together in a mockery of anticipation. Julian twitched. He stepped forward, waving his hand gently, not wanting to disturb the air too violently. The fly buzzed away, landing on the rim of a wineglass filled with a vintage Pinot Noir that had long since oxidized into vinegar. "Patience," Julian hissed at the insect. "Service has not begun." He returned to the block. The duck legs were waiting, cured in salt and thyme for 24 hours. He rinsed them with the tenderness of a father bathing a newborn, washing away the excess salt. The water ran pink into the drain. He patted the skin dry with linen towels. The smell in the kitchen was complex. Beneath the sharp, clean scent of sanitizer and the earthy aroma of raw poultry, there was an undercurrent, a sweet, sickly perfume that no amount of ventilation could scrub. It was the scent of overripe melon and copper. It was the scent of Elena. Julian had tried to mask it earlier with bowls of vinegar and burning sage, but the rot was persistent. It was a heavy, invisible fog that coated the back of his tongue. He ignited the gas range. The blue flame roared to life, a sudden rush of noise in the quiet mausoleum. He placed a heavy cast-iron pot on the burner, melting a generous amount of duck fat. "The secret is the temperature," Julian lectured the silent room. He glanced at Elena. Her jaw had slackened further, the mouth gaping open as if in a silent scream. "Don't look at me like that. I know you think I rush the rendering. I promise, low and slow, just for you." He moved to her side, producing a small napkin. Delicately, he dabbed at the corner of her mouth, where a dark, viscous fluid had begun to leak. It smelled of bile and old iron. "A little messy, darling," he murmured. "We must maintain standards." As the duck fat melted, the kitchen temperature began to climb. The walk-in refrigerator had malfunctioned 2 days ago, or perhaps Julian had turned it off. His memory was a fractured mosaic of grief and delusion, and the ambient heat was accelerating the processes at the table. Julian returned to the stove. He submerged the legs in the liquid gold of the fat. He added cloves of garlic, whole peppercorns, and sprigs of rosemary. The aroma began to bloom, battling the stench of decay. For a moment, the kitchen smelled like a restaurant again. It smelled like life. But then he heard it, a wet, slipping sound. He turned. Elena's hand, which he had arranged artfully on the stem of the wineglass, had slid. The skin of her fingers, loosened by the process of autolysis, had begun to slough off against the glass, leaving a smear of grey tissue and fluid. Julian stared, the knife trembling in his hand. It wasn't disgust he felt, it was a critical dissatisfaction. The plating was ruined. No, 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 he muttered, rushing over. He touched her hand to reposition it, but the skin was distinct from the flesh beneath, sliding like a loose glove. The tactile sensation was horrific, cold, wet, and detached. He pulled his hand back, gasping. His fingerprints were left impressed in the slime coating her dermis. He looked at the duck bubbling gently in the pot. Then he looked at Elena. "You're falling apart," he whispered, tears pricking his eyes. I can't serve you if you aren't perfect." He ran to the pantry and returned with a spool of butcher's twine and a trussing needle. He approached his wife with the focus of a surgeon. He needed to bind her. He needed to hold the form together. He pierced the skin of her wrist, threading the twine through the underlying muscle to anchor it. No blood-flowed gravity had settled it all in her legs and back days ago. There was only a hiss of escaping gas and the leakage of clear, serous fluid. He stitched the skin back into place, tightening the twine until it bit into the grey flesh. "Just a little stitch," he soothed. "Beauty is pain, Elena. You always said that." He worked his way up her arm, trussing her like a roast. The macabre modification gave her a quilted, artificial appearance. When he finished, he stepped back. She looked grotesque, a doll made of spoiling meat and string, but she held her shape. The heat in the kitchen was stifling now. Sweat ran down Julian's back, soaking his chef's coat. The fat in the pot was bubbling rhythmically. "Blop, blop, blop." He began the reduction sauce. He squeezed blood, oranges, the ruby juice staining his hands. He combined it with sugar, letting it caramelize, then deglazed the pan with port wine. The smell was intoxicatingly sweet, mingling with the heavy necrotic odor in the room to create a scent that was dizzying, hallucinogenic. The shadows in the corners of the kitchen seemed to stretch. The stainless steel surfaces reflected distorted images of his face, gaunt, eyes wide and bloodshot, a rictus of madness etched into his jaw. He looked at the ingredients on his prep table. They seemed insufficient. The duck was merely bird. The orange was merely fruit. This was the final meal. It required more. It required communion. He looked at the trimmings bin. He looked at the fluid leaking from Elena's stitching. "Integration," Julian whispered. "Flavor profile." He dipped a spoon into the dark puddle accumulating on the floor beneath Elena's chair. He brought it to his nose. It smelled of earth, of deep, rich musk, of the end of all things. It was the ultimate umami, the flavor of mortality. With a shaking hand, he added a drop of the fluid to the simmering orange sauce. The sauce hissed, turning a darker, more violent shade of crimson. "Part of you," he said, stirring frantically. "So we are together, inside and out." The buzzing grew louder. It wasn't just one fly anymore. Julian looked up. The ceiling rack where the pans hung was crawling. A living carpet of blue bottles and flesh flies had gathered, drawn by the heat and the scent. Their collective buzzing was a low-frequency drone that vibrated in Julian's teeth. "The guests," Julian smiled, his lips cracking. "I didn't realize we had a full house." He plated the duck. The skin was crisp, golden brown. The meat was tender, falling off the bone. He poured the corrupted blood-orange sauce over it, the dark liquid glistening under the lights. He added a garnish of micro-greens, placing them with tweezers. He carried the plate to the table and set it down in front of Elena. "Bon appétit, my love." She did not move. The fly on her eye had been joined by 2 others. They explored the dry caverns of her nostrils. Julian sat in the chair opposite her. He had prepared no plate for himself. He watched her. He waited for her to lift the fork, to taste his creation, to smile and tell him it was perfectly seasoned. "Eat," he commanded softly. Silence, save for the bubbling pot and the buzzing overhead. "Eat it!" He slammed his fist on the table. The silverware rattled. Elena's head jolted forward, then fell back against the brace with a wet thud. Julian stared at the food. It was cooling. The fat was congealing. The perfection was fleeting. "You don't want it," he whispered, his voice broken. "After all this work, after I stitched you together." He looked at the flies. They were descending, not towards the duck, towards her. They landed on her arms, her face, the exposed flesh of her neck. They were uninterested in his culinary arts. They wanted the raw material. A realization bloomed in Julian's mind, cold and sharp as the Gutto. He had misunderstood the menu. Elena was not the diner. She was the venue. She was the vessel. And the Maggots? They were the true gourmands. They were the only ones who truly appreciated the texture of flesh, the sweetness of decay. They did not care for reduction sauces or confit. They wanted the truth. Julian stood up. He felt a strange sense of clarity. The madness didn't recede, it simply crystallized into a new logic. "I understand now," he said, unbuttoning his chef's coat. He stripped it off, revealing his pale, sweating torso. "The meal isn't finished. The service is incomplete." He walked to the pantry and retrieved a large jar of honey and a bag of coarse sea salt. He returned to Elena. With reverence he began to glaze her. He poured the honey over her head, letting it ooze slowly down her graying hair, over her clouded eyes, filling the cracks in her lips. The flies buzzed louder, a frenzied chorus of excitement. "Sweetness to bind," Julian chanted. He took handfuls of salt and rubbed them into her arms, into the stitching, exfoliating the dead skin, seasoning the meat. Salt to preserve, salt to purify. The kitchen was swarming now. The flies were a black cloud, a tornado of wings and hunger circling the table. Julian looked at his own hands. They were sticky with honey and necrotic fluids. He looked at the knife on the block. If the flies were the guests, and Elena was the main course, then who was he? He was the chef, and a chef must taste everything. But he was also the survivor, and the survivor must envy the dead. He grabbed the plate of duck he had cooked for her. He ate it with his bare hands, tearing the meat from the bone, shoving it into his mouth, grease smearing his chin. He ate the sauce that contained the essence of his wife. He swallowed it whole, choking, gagging, forcing it down. "We are one," he gagged. "We are the same." He looked at Elena's arm. The skin he had stitched had split again under the pressure of the gas building up inside her. A cluster of small white grains moved in the open wound. Maggots. The first clutch had hatched. They writhed in the honey and salt, pale and blind, eating, consuming, recycling. Julian fell to his knees beside her chair. He watched the larvae work. It was hypnotic. It was efficient. It was the only pure thing in this rotting world. "Beautiful," he wept. "My children." He reached out and scooped a finger into the wound, collecting a cluster of the writhing maggots. He held them up to the light. They were pearl white, glistening. "A meal for the maggots," he whispered. He didn't put them back. He didn't wipe his hand. He looked at his own arm. Living flesh. Warm, resistant. He picked up the Gutto. "The menu needs a second course," he said to the buzzing room. Something fresher, something rare. He placed the blade against his left forearm. The steel felt cold. He pressed down. The skin parted like silk. Blood, bright and arterial, sprayed across the white tablecloth, mixing with the honey and the grey fluids of his wife. The flies changed their tune. The scent of fresh iron drove them into a frenzy. The cloud shifted, moving from Elena to Julian. He didn't flinch as the blade cut deeper, exposing the muscle, the tendon, the bone. He carved a long, thin strip of his own flesh. Mise en place. He grunted through clenched teeth, sweat blinding him. He laid the strip of his own meat onto Elena's lap, an offering to the colony that claimed her. "Eat," he whispered to the maggots. "Eat and grow strong." He leaned his head against her honey-coated thigh. The blood loss was making him dizzy. The room was spinning. The buzzing was no longer a sound. It was a physical pressure pushing him down. He felt them landing on him. Hundreds of tiny legs on his back, his neck, his open wound. They were ticklish at first. Then they began to bite. Julian closed his eyes. He imagined he was at a grand banquet. The applause was thunderous, or was that the buzzing? The critics were raving. He reached up, his hand finding Elena's cold, sticky hand. He interlaced their fingers. "The service," Julian breathed, his voice failing as the darkness took him, "was exquisite." As he lost consciousness, the only sound in the kitchen was the wet, rhythmic sound of thousands of tiny mouths feeding, blurring the line between the chef, the wife, and the meal, until there was nothing left but the feast.